Hello, everyone. This is Sandy Bates, and I want to welcome you to my new website, As for Me and My Nation. And I want to tell you a little bit about myself. First is based off of this book that I just wrote, As for Me and My Nation. And this is coming out backwards right now, but I spent over a decade working on this book, which I'll go into my journey in some of the later videos because we're going to go through the book chapter by chapter, and I invite you guys to come join me if you would like to. And first of all, I just thought I'd give a little introductory video that told a little bit about who I am. And I'm a mother of three grown children. They're all still here right now. Two of them graduated college a few years ago, and one of them is still in college. Um, Ashley, Rebecca, and Caleb. And actually, together, the synonyms or the acronyms of the first letters of their names in their birth order spells ARC. And yes, I didn't know that until after the third one was born. I didn't realize that God had did that. Um, I was born in Decatur, Georgia area and lived, our family moved to Stone Mountain, Georgia when I was in the third grade. Um, Prior to that, at age 7, I had an experience with the Lord, and I asked my mother if I could be baptized, and I started reading the scriptures. My parents were not steeped in Christianity, even though they believed in God. It was not really lived out in our home. So this was God wooing me on His own. And um, shortly after that experience was when we moved to Stone Mountain, Georgia, and it was there that I grew up. The rest of Most of the rest of my life until I got married, maybe a couple of years before I got married, I moved out with some roommates. So that's where my story really starts. And we stopped going to church after that initial experience. So my teenage life was a lot of wrong stuff and went down a really bad pathway. However, the good news is when I was 18, a cousin invited me to a youth ministry at a church where I went down front and gave my life to the Lord and have been running hard after him ever since. Not that there was some warfare not in between. As you know, the enemy tries to chase you down when you make that initial experience. And I had no idea what spiritual warfare was, nor had anybody taught me. So the first 6 months after that, I'm pretty sure he tried to kill me. But when I came to myself and crawled my way back to this church, I clung on to God from then on and haven't left him ever since. And unfortunately, my first church, though it was spirit filled and there was a lot of wonderful teaching, and I met wonderful people that I'm still close friends with. There were some serious underlying problems that we didn't know about. So in the early 1990s, it things kind of blew apart with some very serious scandals that took place. I'd already married my husband, Jim, which we got married in September of 1990. And we ended up, you know, going to another church. The next few churches after that were all people that we knew that we had met out of the first church that started their own churches other places. So it was a healing journey for me. Um, a lot of the things that we were told were not true. So I remember one day when God erased the blackboard in a vision, and he had us study the scriptures for ourselves and figure out what was God and what wasn't God. So it was a bit of a messy process, but God brought us through. He was faithful. And like I said, now I live in McDonough, Georgia. And I have been passionate about our nation for some time. I have always been involved in prayer. That's where I gravitated towards in all of my churches was intercessory prayer ministries. And so that has been my love, is to spend time with God. I love his presence. I'm addicted to his presence, and I'm a real big baby if I don't feel him. So I know we don't always go by feelings, but I really like the feelings. So that's a little bit about me. It the journey for being passionate about our nation, hence how this book came about, started actually in 2012. To kind of back up a little bit, I had not paid much attention to politics most of my life. Like, honestly, if Jesse Waters had came up with a microphone like he does, I would have been clueless, like embarrassingly clueless. I wouldn't have known the difference between the political parties. I probably would have known who our president was and probably not who the vice president was. I maybe would have known who the governor of our state was, but not much past that. And my journey of awakening basically happened during the Obama administration. It happened somewhat, of course, when we had the terrible terrorist attacks on the Twin Towers in 2001, September 11th, 2001, which burst us all into a new level of prayer for our nation. And so gradually I became to where I was becoming passionate. But I would say the full download of passion happened during Obama's first term. It's not that I had anything personal against him or anything like that. However, the liberal values that was taking us far away from our Christian viewpoints started becoming very disturbing. And that shifted me and some of my very close friends that I prayed with often. I call them my intercessory prayer buddies and best friends. It shifted our prayer times to past just praying about our families and the churches we were involved in, but praying for the nation. And it was during that time that God began to download and reveal things to all of us about what we were fighting and about how to fight it. And I would say about at the end of 2012, actually, it was the day after the 2012 election where Obama was running against Romney. Now, just to be completely honest with you guys, I wasn't crazy about Romney. However, the liberal choice was not a choice to me. I always felt like I needed to choose the conservative choice because of our Christian values and being pro life and those kind of things. So I voted for Romney, even though I wasn't, there was something about him that didn't sit well. So the day after the election, when Obama won the second term, I was downhearted and downtrodden, like most of us are when we don't get the person we chose, or election doesn't go the way that we want them to go. And I had taken my children to school, and I was on my way back from taking my children to school when God started downloading to me that He was in control, that actually His plan was going to be much better than we could ask, think, or imagine. And what he was going to do in the next election was going to be really cool. Now, at that time, none of us had any idea that Donald Trump was going to run or anything like that. I barely knew who Donald Trump was, except that he was a wealthy businessman and he was really good at making money, and he was really good at firing people. from what I understand from the reality show. That I don't think I ever watched that reality show. Um, so basically, a couple of days after that lost election, I was in prayer and I heard myself boldly declare, "As for me and my nation, we will serve the Lord." Now, you know, as well as I know, those of you that are Christians for a while, that sometimes the Holy Spirit prays something through you that you didn't plan up here. It came out of your mouth and you're listening back to it like a recording. And so that's what happened to me. I heard myself say that and I paused and thought, wow, I've always prayed that famous scripture in Joshua, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord," over my home family, but had not prayed it in a national way, nor had I remembered it being prayed in a national way. So therefore, I took notice of that, and I knew it was a declaration of faith over our nation. Um, so therefore, God started downloading to me chapters and things. I had never read a book before. Um, didn't know what I was doing. I just started feeling this intense vision. In fact, which I'll tell about in some of the later videos. I mean, the beginning of 2016, before Trump won, God gave me my own prophecy out on the deck praying and downloaded to me a word about America. So I knew that he wasn't through with America. He had a great plan. He wanted his church to stand with his great plan. And so at the end of 2012, I mean, I started writing a book. Now, of course, I thought that I'd probably have it done like really fast, which didn't happen, obviously, because it took 11 years. Um, some of that was my fault because when I got frustrated and didn't know what I was doing, it wasn't the revelation part. God would download to me revelation in the word and revelation about our nation. It was the fact I never put a book together before. And so I would get frustrated when I'd have this list of things God had showed me, but I didn't know where to put them or how to put them in chapter order or anything like that. And so I'd want to do anything but that, honestly. Like I have this big desire in the future that everybody around me knows that it's like my big thing I'm believing for the Lord is I want a beach place because I love the ocean and rarely get to go. And I thought it would be a great place to pray or something. So usually when I procrastinated, I'd go look for beach houses, like look on the internet. And no, we did not have the finances for a second house. It was just part of my faith dream. And that's what I would do. But God would draw me back into working on the book, especially when He would download something else to me. Um, so along the way, I was going slow. It wasn't that I was working on it all the time, as you know. There was probably months that passed sometimes and I didn't work on it. And then I'd be in prayer. God would tell me something and I would write it down. I'm pretty much sure that um, most of the time, I mean, that was honestly probably the one thing that I did right. Um, was write down the revelation because in the beginning of the vision there was two or three people in a row that came to me and says, write down everything the Lord tells you. So I obeyed that part and I would write things down. I would carry notebooks with me and write down the revelation and all of that. And it's a good thing I did because when years would go past, unless God just retold me the revelation, I would not have remembered had I not had stacks of paper. I remember my missionary friends, Haxon and Sia, when they came to see me in the summer of 2021, that I had met at a revival school, and we became really, really close friends. When she saw the stack I mean, very large stack of folders of notes that I had. She was like, "Wow." Well, of course, a lot of those notes didn't make it into the final cut in the book, but it just shows that I did write stuff down when God would speak. And it's a good thing because by the end of when I really started seriously putting things together, would have probably been about the start of 2020. And I'll tell you the miracle that happened there. First of all, like I said, I had been working on the book off and on since the very end of 2012. And every year I would make a goal to finish it by the end of that year, which you know that that didn't happen. And then so I'd feel condemnation at the end of that year. And so that started in January. Okay, this is going to be the year. And then another year at the end, I would feel like a failure and a condemnation, even though someone had given me a word at one point that it wasn't time yet, that for me just to keep writing. I believed it was time. And so I would go through this cycle of failure. And I'm sure you guys listening have done that before. And, but the miracle that happened in 2020 was I had become really I loved Pastor Hank and Brenda Kuhneman in Omaha, Nebraska. Now, of course, I live in Georgia, so I never had the privilege of attending one of their church services in Nebraska. However, in 2018 or 19, I think it was 2019, my husband and I went to a conference about an hour north of us that Pastor Hank was one of the speakers, which he did actually call us out and prophesy over us, which was super cool. He really basically just said our dreams and visions were going to come to pass, that we were going to be in the season of reward and visions coming to pass. Um, so I knew that the book was one of those visions that God was going to bring to pass because that was the main thing I was really going after right then. And fast forward to the next year, like I said, I've been doing their online prayer phone calls for I don't know, I'm guessing a few years at this point. Um, they were Hank and Brenda was doing prayer calls for the nation where um it's not that you were on like a Zoom call, you were just calling in a number and joining in with prayer with them over the nation. And sometimes Hank would prophesy. So there was sometimes Pastor Hank would have prophetic words on the call. And this time it was April 2020. And we know what all was going on in 2020. That was the wonderful pandemic that rocked our worlds. And anyway, I was on one of those prayer calls. And normally, I don't know, I'm not, at that time, I wasn't one that walked around barefoot necessarily. I usually had my tennis shoes on or sandals or something. But I was barefoot that day because I just painted my toenails. And you know, ladies, that we don't want to mess them up once we want them to dry very thoroughly. So I had painted my toenails on this prayer call for the nation. And Pastor Sam, not Pastor Sam, I'm sorry. He reminds me of a pastor prophet I had in the past. Pastor Hank had an unusual prophetic word that there were some on the call that were barefoot. And it was a very holy moment where he could see the angels around us. And basically, he was saying in the next 30, 60, and 100 days that God was going to open some amazing doors for us. And so I was really excited. It was really funny because Pastor Brenda had shoes on, and she joked that she quickly slipped her shoes off from under the desk. although he had another word for those who had shoes on afterwards, so everybody got included in something. So I took that very seriously. I was like, yes, God, I'm so hungry. Well, I would say a week or so after that word, I get a phone call, not a phone call, I'm sorry. It was an email from Jennifer Miskoff's Ministries of a Writing in the Glory Zoom group invitation. Now, I figured that I got on that email list because I had purchased a writing book on Amazon that she wrote. However, the group was supposed to be for people who had taken the actual Writing in the Glory class, which I had not. At that time, she was having them in person, and she lived in Southern California, and I live in Georgia, so I had not had, didn't even know about her really, except that I bought a book from her. So when I got that invitation, I had that sense and leap inside. This is an open door. Jump on it. I don't think I'd ever been on a Zoom call. And so I was a little bit nervous having to get in front of a camera and all that stuff that was new to me. Plus technology can be kind of new where I'm always asking my kids like, how do I do this? How do I do that? Um, but I joined that class that night and learned that I needed to take the online class, which I did immediately. And the rest is history. I mean, I desperately needed help in putting this book together. I had the revelation, I had the downloads, I was writing things. However, I didn't know how to put it together. And um, I was thrust into a whole group of writers, and some of them very seasoned writers. So that's a testimony you can just not make up in the sense that it was awesome. Therefore, I was so grateful God put me in a group full of writers. I ended up becoming friends with people around the world that joined this group. There were so many people that prayed for me, prophesied over this book. God would speak to them things and they knew very little about me, but they would be right on with what they prophesied, that God had put in my heart, different things. And um, I became friends with them and they were praying for me and I was praying for them. And so that's the first 30 days. I joined the Writing in the Glory group. Well, then around 60 days, just like the prophecy said, 30, 60, 100, Jennifer decided to do a revival class on the Azusa Street revival. Well, I love revival history. It's something me and my family would study sometimes. We had a bunch of Robert Larson's books on God's generals, and we would study the different people that brought great moves of God to the church. And so we love that kind of thing. So again, I knew God was opening doors and I was just like all in. Okay, I'm doing that class. But then I ended up meeting even more people from around the world that I was becoming friends with. And then she did another class that I joined in, and then she realized what God was doing, that God was bringing a school of revival. So those of us that had joined in the first two classes felt God had just joined us all together. I mean, we're talking people from countries all over the world that were hungry for revival. And we all ended up in the School of Revival, in which I graduated from the first year school in May of 2021. However, that opened other doors to people in my groups I continued in the Writing in the Glory group and even helped lead it at times and things like that. And um, but other groups from people I met there started online groups that I'm still involved in, and I've become very close friends with a lot of people. And we pray for one another, and we pray for each other's destinies and book projects. And um, So God really opened doors that was necessary for me to birth this baby. I thought I could birth it, but I needed help. I needed a lot of midwives, and God did not disappoint. And He did exceedingly abundantly above that I could ask or think. So back to America, God has really showed me that our best days are yet to come. That as bad as it seems right now, we just need to hang in there because we're going to get a Red Sea experience where God's going to just deal with our enemies that have tried to keep us in bondage and trying to bring in communistic thinking. And of course, us mothers are just horrified at some of the horrible doctrines that have been introduced in the school systems. And so there's so much to pray about, so much to stand, but he has told me that it's going to be amazing. You know, one of the chapters of my book was on Esther, and he told me it's an Esther moment. In fact, I have a picture of Esther on the cover of the book because we're in an Esther moment where God is going to deal with the Hamans, but we have to be bold and stand and speak truth, just like Esther had to tell the king the truth about what Haman was doing, not knowing how it would turn out because, you know, it was kind of Haman's number one guy that he liked to hang out with. So you never really know how that's going to go. But she was brave and she was courageous and she told the truth, and God gave her favor. And I'm believing that God has given us favor. And this isn't just about politics. This is about where God's taking the church in a new reformation. This is where He's taken all of us individually, our families. Our best days are truly yet to come. And we're in birthing pains right now. So we need to hang in there that the baby is coming, but we need to stand for the values that God has for this nation, the godly values that are trying to be stolen, but He's going to restore. And we're going to stand with Him and see this amazing, amazing new era of the kingdom coming forth. And so I just wanted to tell y'all a little bit about how this started and a little bit about me. And I hope that you enjoyed that. And I I will post the details of the class and the videos I'm going to do. And I hope that you guys can join me. Love you bunches. Bye bye.